tardes. Me llamo es Juan Shier. Y no hablo español muy bien. So the rest is going to be in English, unfortunately. First time in Madrid, first time in Spain. Unfortunately, I've only seen a little bit of your city so far, but it's very nice, and it's nice to see the sun. I've been in Northern Europe for a little while. It's very gray and gloomy, so it's nice to be happy and sunny in Madrid. So I work in the Office of Technology, which what we do is we study the threat. We work with Sophos labs, and we try to understand it in a way that it helps you make sense of it. And so this is what I'm going to try to do today. It's a big topic, the threat landscape, right? There's a lot there. And I'm going to pick a few things that we're going to go down the path, and I'm going to try to sort of weave a little bit of a story for you. We're going to talk about the methods of infection, and then we're going to talk about some specific threats, and along the way I'll give you some little hints about how you can protect yourselves. You've heard a lot about some speakers, there's one more after me, but you've heard a lot about exploits and ransomware, and I just recently IoT. I didn't really understand it, but I got enough of the gist to know what was happening there. We're all in trouble, right? And I'll speak about some of those pieces in a little bit more detail. But first, let's talk about the threat as it exists today. And in many ways, it feels like there's an imbalance here. There's asymmetric warfare, as we say. One side, has different motives and different capabilities than another. And sometimes what we find is it costs more to defend than it does to attack, because the attacker only has to be right once, and the defenders have to be right all the time. However, if you look at what we've done at Sophos, all the tools that we're putting into your hands right now, I'm here to tell you we can sort of flip that model around a little bit, because with all the different technologies like Intercept X, like our the XG firewall and our malicious traffic detection and advanced threat protection, the bad guys have to be right every single time, and that's good for us. So in a perfect world, there would be no bugs in software. All of our users would be cybersecurity experts, and exploitation would be impossible. In a near-perfect world, an exploit would be used just once, and then it would be useless after that. But that's not where we live. So let's look at Spain specifically. And I pulled some data out of Sophos Labs just to get a sense for, what are you people doing? Your partners, customers, your friends, your family. What is it that they're seeing here? Now, let me explain this a little bit, because it might not be super obvious to you guys. I look at this stuff on a daily basis. But that very top one there, to me, is very telling in terms of how we do our protection. Because a generic detection for Sophos means, I don't care what the threat is. I'm just going to block it. And behind that generic detection, there are thousands of different threats. So that's one of these sort of methods of infection. If we start spotting things like a phishing web page or an email with a booby-trapped attachment, for example, or just a file that comes in on a USB stick, we're just going to block it if we know it's bad. But below that, we see our good old friend Configure, right? This is something that's been around for quite some time now, and it shouldn't be up there anymore. But we're still seeing a lot of people that aren't patching their systems, so we're seeing there as well. And a lot of things rely on JavaScript. As a matter of fact, if we look at the emails that are coming into Sophos Labs, over 40% of them include some sort of zip or archive with scripting inside it. So we've got, the purple is WSF scripting, Windows scripting file format. Then we've got some JavaScript in the green, and then the red is some additional scripting as well. What's interesting about this graph, this goes up to the middle of September, is there's a little bit of a gap over here. That's when the crooks go on holidays in the summer, right? That's their vacation time. So let's talk about some of this infrastructure. And the first one that's very prevalent that we're seeing a lot of is phishing. And, we don't see a lot of this stuff anymore, right? This is the old school phishing. We know this is phishing. This doesn't fool us anymore. But what happens when something like this comes into your inbox? When I was looking for screenshots for this particular presentation, I got this in my email, and it was very timely. I'm like, okay, great. Here's a good example of something that is incredibly well done. Now, the text doesn't matter, but it's incredibly well done because it has proper grammar, proper spelling. The imagery is right. I'm a Canadian citizen, so it's coming from the Canada Revenue Agency. And at first glance, it might fool a lot of people, and it does, and that's why phishing works. So I dug into it a little bit, and I saw that the header came from some domain in France, so that's a little bit wrong, and it's got an actual link that I can click, and when you see something like this, you should not click a link because you don't know where it came from, and you weren't expecting this, and it's not tax season. So, of course I clicked it. And it took me to a form that asked me for a lot of information, and when a form asks me for a lot of information, I fill it in. It's all bogus data, but what's interesting here is what they're asking for, right? They're asking for not only my social security number, social insurance number, my national ID number, right? But they're asking for things like my date of birth and some of my income, which, again, made up numbers, but the government should already know this stuff. And then they go deeper and they start asking me for things like my driver's license, my credit card, and all they're doing is building a profile of you, which leads to the next type of phishing that I like to call high-definition phishing. So what is this? Well, this is data that was taken from a breach of a large supermarket chain in the UK that was then later used in a phishing campaign to distribute ransomware. So now as a user, you get this email and you go, well, they have my name, they have my home address, maybe there is something to it, and maybe I'll click on that link to find out, well, there might be a mistake that I need to correct, right? So now the believability of that phish goes much higher, and while this is just text in this case, many times they include things like graphics, and they're very locally targeted. So one breach led to another phishing campaign, which led to a ransomware attack. And there's some companies that are mentioned in these screenshots here that are local, again, so local users, local businesses, and we see that all over the world. Everywhere we go, we see examples of the crooks taking local familiar brands and using them against you. So this is why it's really difficult to say to people, oh, you should be better at spotting the phish. Well, guess what? It's very difficult today. The quality has increased to the point where even security researchers can be fooled. So let's talk about malvertising. This is another piece that has been increasingly on the use, increasingly being used to deploy malicious software. And there's a bit of a bill here, and I'll build it out to a certain point. So basically, when you load up a web page and there's an ad on it, it will go and fetch that ad from various different avenues. One of them could be an ad network, such as Google's AdSense or the Yahoo ad network. It may call a third party, or better yet, it may call these real-time bidding services, which is like auction sites like eBay for advertisements. And what the bad guys can do is take a phishing attack, get your credentials for your real-time bidding account, log on as you, insert malicious ads into the stream, using a flash exploit, for example, compromise your computer just by visiting a site. And this is very common, and the campaigns are very short-lived, and they are very effective because they use well-known sites to distribute their malware. And the last one I'll talk about is the exploit kit in terms of the methods of infection, because this one is what I call the glue that holds the cybercriminal underground together. And if we look up here, let's say that our friend John Shaw, who you saw earlier talking about Intercept X and some of the endpoint stuff, he's got some ransomware that he's crafted, and he needs to get into the hands of people. But he's not sure how to do that. So why not connect yourself with an exploit kit admin, someone who's got infrastructure capable of deploying that? Now, we need to drive traffic to that exploit kit. So the exploit kit admin is going to talk to his friend, the spammer or the malvertiser, and say, I need a campaign that can drive traffic, that is going to capture the imagination of the good local people of Madrid to click or to even follow a link or simply just to browse to a site. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to aggregate that traffic by using my friend up here, the traffic aggregator service. So now I'm taking money from John, but I'm also paying for some additional services. And ultimately what happens as a victim, you get exploited, like we saw with that shockwave flash exploit. So now I need to employ the services of an exploit merchant, somebody who's really good at either finding them or writing them. And so at the end of the day, when the victims surf the site, they get directed to my malware distribution servers, and depending on where you are in the world, I serve you something by leveraging the services of all my friends in the criminal underground. I saw you just touched on Mirai in the previous talk. And I'll very quickly sort of run it down by the numbers because I found this really interesting. When I looked at the numbers after Mirai had happened and after the DDoSes had happened against OVH and Brian Krebs, what was interesting is there was about 550,000 compromised devices. This number goes up and down depending on who's in control of those particular devices. But there were 9 different architectures, meaning there was one for MIPS and ARM and x86 and x64. It was all precompiled and very easy. And they were using TCP. Friends don't let friends use TCP and FTP, sorry, not TCP, Telnet. And 80%, as the presenter before me said, were DVRs, IP cameras with default usernames and passwords. And what's interesting is why I said that 550,000 sort of fluctuates is because there's other botnets out there that are also competing for the same exact devices. And so they'll go and try to infect the same device. Sometimes they'll even patch that device so that only they can maintain control of that. And there's this kind of war going back and forth for some of these devices. Now, 10% of them attacked Dyn, which is about 5,000 hosts, and the source code was released on the 1st of October. Now, the infrastructure itself is kind of interesting because you've got all these bots down here. This is the orange over here are all the bots, and they do 2 things. They do the attack on the one side, and they do the vulnerability scanning or the TCP/23 telnet scanning on the other side. And once they find something, they report that to the central infrastructure, which then sends commands to another piece of the infrastructure to go and infect more hosts, which turns them into bots, which then gives you more power to scan bigger swaths of the internet and get more bots. They call this real-time compromise. That's the crook's name for it. And then if you're a user, the U's up in the top left, this is where you use a web portal and API to access the command and control infrastructure and order your DDoS. So this kind of thing is not going away anytime soon. We've been warning about this for a very long time, and unfortunately, it took quite a large disturbance on the internet to finally wake people up. But as more and more of these devices are produced with weak security and no security by design, this is going to become a bigger problem. So now let's look at the specifics. Document malware is one of the things that you can get if you hit an exploit kit or if you get phished. And one of the reasons it works is because documents causing problems have been out of the spotlight. They haven't been doing much harm for a very long time. And so we're familiar with them, and it's okay to open that Excel spreadsheet. It's okay to open that PowerPoint. But the criminals, decided that this would be a great way to then start reinfecting people with an old method that's now new again. And how they do this relies heavily on social engineering. And I'll give you some examples of some of these documents that you might see in your inbox. In this case here, this is a document with an invoice that's obscured for your security. But if you want to see it, and because you happen to be in finance, you have to process invoices. So a nice handy arrow says, here's where you go to unblock, or this is how you go to infect yourself. But in this case, that's exactly what happens. Here's another example from an Iranian engineering company where they've used, basically they've obscured or obfuscated the images instead. But again, the same sort of tactic in this case. And just to prove that the crooks are very lazy sometimes and will try just about anything to infect people, we found this one in our spam traps. So they don't have to try very hard because unfortunately when people see a button to click, I think we should rename that macro button or the enable or options button to infect me now, and that might help people not click on that button. But it just goes to show that there's a lot of this out there that uses different tactics to try and fool the users. And as a matter of fact, if you want to do this today, you can go to the dark web and buy a kit to craft these types of documents for a mere $290. So how do you protect against this? Things like Sandstorm, sandboxing technology are very important because now I can take that document that's coming through the web or through the firewall or through my email gateway and analyze it before a user even gets to touch it and has the chance to click that button. Obviously, there's some other ways that you can do that, but Sandstorm, Sophos' Sandstorm, is a perfect way to protect against this type of attack. The second one is data stealing malware. And data stealing malware is one of these things that involves a whole bunch of different compromises and security failures along the way. And the biggest thing about data stealing malware is it often requires a human actor, because the humans are very good at spotting anomalies and being able to run around certain technologies in order to get their way and move across the network. And finally, there's an unknown baseline. I'll speak to that at the very end. But a hacker's dream is being able to infect or get on a machine like Linux or a Mac, for example, because it's got all the tools on it to be able to do network reconnaissance. And very often we see this kind of strategy where the criminals are getting on an operating system like a Linux or a Mac and then jumping across to, let's say, your Windows endpoints and then to your servers. So yes, we already protect all those guys, but guess what? Protecting these guys is also very important, and Sophos can help you do that. In a more elaborate scenario, this is what data stealing really looks like. You find your way into a network, and this is, the target example, while old, is very good at describing exactly how this happens. You phish a third-party contractor, and you go through the extranet, find some credentials, find your way into the main network, elevate your privileges, move laterally, and then eventually compromise some POS, and exfiltrate all the data using FTP. Remember, we don't use FTP anymore. It's not secure. And so outbound filtering is really important for this. If I block Telnet and FTP outbound and Telnet and FTP inbound, I can stop things like, potentially, botnet creation, right? I can also stop data exfiltration. But more importantly, knowing your baseline is a surefire way to determine whether you have a problem or not. Using firewalls and the associated logging technologies that go with those, I can now see what a normal day looks like. And if all of a sudden at 3 o'clock in the morning there's a big spike in traffic, that might be an issue. As a matter of fact, there's a law firm in South America, Mossack Fonseca, that lost 2.6 terabytes of information earlier this year. They didn't know their baseline, otherwise they would have seen that, and they walked out the front door. They would have seen a big spike of 2 terabytes worth, nearly 3 terabytes worth of information. But they weren't looking because they also didn't know their baseline. And finally, everybody's favorite friend, ransomware. Now, this is a threat that, at its very core, why it works is because, after all, it's your data. It's no longer just random files on a system. It's the stuff that you care about. And we'll look at some of those files in a second. But if we look at the configuration file here for Locky specifically, I'm going to point out a few things. For example, this affiliate ID. This works in a sort of a pyramid way. So now my friend John here with his ransomware, he also wants to make it available to other criminals as well. So he's going to sell that kit to other people to distribute however they want. He's choosing the exploit kits. But what they're going to do is he's going to bake in an identification marker that says, now this is copy 1, this is copy 2, this is copy 3, and he's also going to demand 50% of all the proceeds to come back to him. So he provides you with the malware, and he gets a little bit in return as well. The service host flag, registry flags are interesting, and my favorite, the avoid Russian flag. So if we all run Russian operating systems, maybe Locky won't impact us at all, because a lot of this type of ransomware does avoid certain countries. Now, Russia's not the only one, but there's often an indicator of where it comes from by what the ransomware avoids. And these are the types of files that it encrypts. You can see there's pictures, there's movies, there's Office documents, Excel spreadsheets. There are databases in there. These are the things you care about. This is your data. This is the data that keeps your business running on a day-to-day basis, potentially. And so it's important to you and no one else. So that's why ransomware works. Now, there's a gang out there that tried to go, well, having a list like this is great, but what if we're missing something? What if we're missing a file type that we don't know about yet that's really important to the medical industry? So they went to what I call the exclude model. So they said, but except for things that might crash a system, let's encrypt everything on the system, except for the help files, which teach you or which tell you how to pay the ransom, And these two little guys right here, which render your icons, render your images so that A, it doesn't look like there's anything wrong, and B, you can see the picture of your daughter's first birthday or the video from your honeymoon that you only have one copy of and no longer have access to. You can also, again, participate, if you will, in ransomware as a service. This is an example of a kit you can buy that will allow you to run your own ransomware campaigns and makes it nice and easy, right? Ransomware made simple. It also has a give mercy button down here, which I find really interesting. So if you are a criminal with a heart of gold and you feel like maybe you've infected the wrong person, maybe it's a not-for-profit organization, you can decrypt all their files for them for free. So I was trying to figure out, how much of this stuff is out there, and I made this little word cloud. And these are all different types of ransomware variants. As a matter of fact, this isn't it. There's way more of those out there. This is 224 examples. And what's interesting is they do different types of things. There's ransomware that's written entirely in JavaScript. There's some that use popular themes for TV shows like Mr. Robot. There's one that's called a website locker, which locks your website away from you, right? It scrambles your website files. Also uses your CPU to mine for bitcoins, and also does DDoS on the side. So it's a bit of a triple threat. And finally, because it's 2016, we saw this little guy over here as well. So our friend the Donald has a piece of ransomware attached to him. It doesn't actually do anything. Like it renames your files, but it doesn't really encrypt them. And if you just click that button, you can just unlock all your files. If only there was a real undo button for Donald Trump, then maybe we'd be in a better place. And people often ask me, why bitcoins? Why do they use bitcoins? Well, it's very simple. Bitcoins are easy, anonymous, and openly criminal. So now I don't have to pretend that I'm a good guy, and, that I'm a fake AV and I'm scanning your computer for viruses and then asking for money. No, I'm a criminal. I want your money. Here's how you get it. And it's nice and easy for people. So unfortunately, Bitcoin, while it is an interesting mode of currency, it can have very serious ramifications on the criminal side of things. So how do you protect yourself? Well, here's some sort of non-security related really tips, and I'll give you guys a chance to take a picture, that you can use to protect yourself. Patch early, patch often is probably the one I think is the most important. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about just doesn't work if your system is fully up to date. And obviously, if you don't choose to do any of that stuff, our friend InterceptX with CryptoGuard is there to save your bacon. So normally this is where I kind of end my talk, but I see I've got a couple minutes, so I'm going to use those minutes because this is a threat presentation, right? What's the biggest threat out there for most people? Our friends, the users. Now, I'm going to turn that on its head because I'm going to tell you that's not really the case. Yes, social engineering works, and people are always happy to help. If you ask them to send to change the processing account from this bank to that bank, they'll just do it because the email was spoofed from the CFO and they don't want to get in trouble. But at the end of the day, people will fall prey to these things, and so you have to be careful to stop worrying about those really bad fishes, because if you train people to watch for those, they'll miss all the really good ones, and instead tell your people, look for emails that have links in them, that have attachments in them, and those are the types of things you want to be careful about. And be careful of your open source intelligence, the stuff you share as a corporation, as a person, because that can be used in turn to launch a campaign against you. And training isn't always the answer. You're going to need technology because technology can help where humans fail. If I just have one of these brain farts, as we say in English, and I click on the link, at least the technology, like my anti-exploit technology or my web technology, can have my back in that case. So what you need to do is you need to create a security culture and make people comfortable with coming to you as security professionals if they do something wrong. If they click that link, tell them to come to you, and you won't beat them with a stick. Maybe you'll say, thank you for reporting that, and give them a $15 gift card to, or €15, I guess, a gift card to Starbucks, or whatever, whatever's important for you. And so what you're doing now is you're using these remote sensors that you have all over your network. Now let's be fair, the 80-20 rule. If you've got 100 people in your organization, 20 people are always going to be broken, they're always going to click on the links, they're always going to open the attachments. But if those 80 people wake up in the morning and they see a phishing email or a potential phishing email in their inbox, they'll warn you, And now you know that those other 20 have already clicked on it, and now you need to start your investigation. So, gracias por su atención. Right? Did I do well? And thank you very much. And I hope if you have any questions, like John said, I'm happy to take them at the end. And again, they will only be in English.